Dr. Satya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vamsi. And a very good evening to all of you. So let's try to straight away go to talk about getting real with ribociclib. Now, we all know that we have randomized control trials, but we also talk about a real world evidence. Can I have my slides, please? I think, as we all know, when we do consider options in advanced breast cancer, one of the most important treatment goals is that intervention improving the overall survival or not. More often than not, OS is not the primary endpoint. It's a very important secondary endpoint. And if that intervention can improve the OS, then I think that becomes a gold standard endpoint for efficacy measures in various oncology trials, especially metastatic breast cancer or advanced breast cancer trials. Can we have the next slide? Are my slides visible?
Some issues, now they are visible, sir.
Yes, yes. So ribociclib, as we all know, across various phase 3 trials has shown to improve the overall survival significantly when added to either an AI, the next please, or fulvestrant. Mona Lisa 2, Mona Lisa 3 and 7, all of them showed a significant OS advantage. Across all the three trials, the primary endpoint was PFS, but then an important secondary endpoint was OS and also the safety and the tolerability. Next slide. If you look at all these three trials, the difference has been in the tune of 11 to 16 months, which means that adding ribociclib increased the median to approximately 1 year, and the median OS is around 5 years now when given as first line across various endocrine partners, or be it premenopausal or postmenopausal. So, with that brief overview of the Mona Lisa trials, let's look at some real world evidence. Next slide. And let's try to say that it's consistent with the previous phase 3 studies we discussed. Next slide. And these two trials are, one is called as the complement and the second is a Ribana. The complement was a phase 3B international study, and the Ribana is a German study. In total, the number of patient population across these real world studies comes to close to 6,000 patients. Next slide. In the complement study, the primary endpoint was safety and tolerability, looking at ribociclib and letrozole in close to 3,000 patients. Next slide. So let's look at this largest real world study across the CDK4/6 inhibitors. And as we know, in real world practice, you will have diverse subgroups. For instance, next slide, there were patients who had CNS metastasis. Some of them where the ECOG PS was around 2, and some who had received prior chemotherapy advanced dose, and then afterwards went on to get the combination of ribociclib with an endocrine partner. And there were some patients who had visceral mets and ECOG PS of 2, some who had visceral mets and got chemotherapy. So a diverse patient population. Next slide. The primary endpoint was safety profile, which was predictable, manageable, and similar to the phase 3 randomized control trial. As we all know, as time goes by with prolonged exposure, the events reduce. Next slide. The TTP was 27.1 months and the median PFS was 26.7 months. So in excess of 24 months, which is what we have seen with the randomized phase 3 trials also. Next slide. If you look at those patients with measurable disease, overall response rate of around 45%, clinical benefit rate of 70%. Now, in this trial, next slide, you had 51 patients who had CNS metastasis also. If you look at the randomized phase 3 trials, 2 and 3 patients having CNS mets were not there. In Mona Lisa 3, you had 8 patients who had stable CNS metastasis. In the Mona trials also, patients having CNS mets are excluded. But you did have a phase 2 randomized, non-randomized study of abemaciclib, where you found a clinical benefit rate of around 25%. The overall response rate, the was only 6%. Now, complement is a phase 3B real-world study where 51 patients had CNS metastasis. Next slide. Now, be it patients who had CNS metastasis or who received prior chemotherapy or an ECOG PS of 2 or visceral metastasis plus prior chemo or ECOG PS of 2 across all subgroups of clinical interest, the efficacy has been consistent with this molecule. So adding ribociclib to endocrine therapy across various subgroups and in real world evidence was able to show consistent efficacy. Next slide. Now, what about the well-being scores, functional and emotional? At this point of time, the patient reported outcomes in the real-world evidence of complement study shows that the quality of life was maintained while on treatment. Next slide. Let's now look at the German Ribana clinical evidence. Next slide. Now, here you had multiple options which were given to patients, which were taken by patients, of which close to 2,000 patients went on to get ribociclib and an AI or fulvestrant. Some close to 200 patients went on to get only endocrine monotherapy, and 145 patients got chemotherapy as the first line treatment. Next slide. Now, if you look at the median PFS with chemotherapy, it's around 15 months. With endocrine therapy alone, around 26 months. By adding ribociclib to a fulvestrant, it was around 31.7 months. So clearly, the balance seems to be tilting towards the combination of ribociclib plus an endocrine therapy. Safety and treatment. Next slide. The safety profile was similar to what was observed in the Mona Lisa studies. The most frequent treatment emergent adverse events were neutropenia, nausea, fatigue, and leukopenia. Next slide. Now, the outcomes what we see in phase 3 in these two phase 3 trials, which are real-world evidence, is also what we saw in the previous 3 phase 3 trials. The median PFS seems to be across all these 5 studies in excess of 24 months. And discontinuations happening because of adverse events are around 10% only. So be it the safety, the AE profile, the tolerance, or the efficacy, the real-world evidence seems to mirror the randomized phase 3 control trials. Next slide. Various guidelines, NCCN and ESMO guidelines also therefore recommend ribociclib plus endocrine therapy in the first line setting. Next slide. If you look at something called as the MCBS score by the ESMO, then the score is 4 or 5 with ribociclib. So that's the advantage of adding a CDK4/6 inhibitor like ribociclib, because you are able to get an MCBS score of 4 or 5. We also are realizing that the 3 CDK4/6 inhibitors are different. I would not say grossly, but then there seems to be some difference across between palbociclib, ribociclib, and abemaciclib to bring out some differences. Next slide. Next slide, please. For instance, adverse events with regard to hematology happens more often with palbociclib and less often with ribociclib or abemaciclib. That's because the number of off-target kinases inhibition is happening by ribociclib is much less when compared to palbociclib or abemaciclib. Next slide. Ribociclib also seems to have more selectivity for CDK4 than CDK6, and the same is also true for abemaciclib. Next slide. But with regard to palbociclib, CDK4 and CDK6 inhibition seems to be almost equal. So to summarize, the real-world evidence trials with the phase 3 trials, the outcomes from randomized control trials can be replicated in real-world experience. Guidelines recommend the early use of CDK4/6 inhibitors, and ribociclib has shown one of the longest median OS of close to 64 months from the Mona Lisa 2 study when you combine that with letrozole. It significantly improves OS across various lines of therapy. be it pre or postmenopausal, and whatever with endocrine partner. Across the phase 3 studies, the magnitude of clinical benefit scale score is 4 or 5, which is which tells us about the quality of life being maintained with this molecule. Looking at almost close to 6,000 real-world cases, it has shown similar efficacy and safety. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk by just telling that the real-world evidence seems to mirror what the phase 3 randomized controlled trials of ribociclib combinations have shown. Thank you so much, Vamsi Krishna and one and all.
Thank you, Dr. Satya. This was, as usual, a great talk, and it's heartening to know that at least we have some real-world evidence that seems to back up the data of what's happening in the clinical trials. I think that's the bottom line for every one of us, that at least in the real world, the drug doesn't seem to behave very differently. And it just strengthens our confidence in the drugs, if I can say. So